I stole a dying dog from a city shelter at midnight. They called me a criminal. I called it mercy. This is what happened next. Most people walk past suffering because it's easier than getting involved. I'm a trauma nurse. I see pain every day, and I've learned to compartmentalize it, push it down, keep moving. But the night I saw Dante in that shelter cage, something broke open inside me. He had hours to live, condemned by a budget cut and a politician's signature. I had a choice: walk away and let the system do what it does, or risk everything I'd worked for to save one life that nobody else thought mattered. I chose the harder path, and it changed everything. This is the story of how a dying Doberman mix named Dante became my reason to fight. It's about midnight rescues and basement surgeries, about a homeless veteran who saw everything, and a disgraced doctor who still had steady hands. It's about standing in front of City Hall with cameras rolling and telling a corrupt commissioner that some lives can't be measured on a spreadsheet. I lost my job. I gained a purpose. And Dante? He's sleeping at my feet right now, breathing steady and strong. A living reminder that mercy is never a crime, even when they try to make it one. If this story reminded you why compassion matters, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories that prove ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a time you stood up for something that mattered, even when it cost you. The fluorescent lights in the trauma ward always made my head ache, but tonight it felt different. Heavier. Like something pressing down on my skull after a week of watching people fight to stay alive. I'm a nurse. Blood doesn't scare me. The monitors screaming, the chaos of trying to restart a heart. I've learned to live with all of it. But walking into that city shelter on my way home, I saw a different kind of dying. The kind that happens in silence, in corners no one looks at. That's when I noticed him. A Doberman mix, coat patchy and covered in old scars, pressed against the back wall of a concrete cage. The tag hanging on the wire said Dante. His breathing was all wrong, shallow, wet, rattling with every breath. I'd heard that sound too many times in the ICU. Congestive heart failure. He's on the list for tomorrow, the volunteer said quietly, staring at the floor instead of me. Commissioner Albert cut the medical budget again. We can't keep up with the meds anymore, so... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I looked back at Dante. He wasn't barking or jumping like the other dogs. He just lifted his head, slow and tired, and his dark eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise, the smell, the fluorescent buzz overhead. In that look, I didn't see a budget cut or a lost cause. I saw a patient. And standing there, feeling the weight of his gaze, something clicked inside me. I knew I couldn't walk away. I knew I wasn't going to let him die alone in the dark, surrounded by concrete and indifference. Not tonight. Not on my watch. I couldn't do this alone. I needed to know when the guards made their rounds, when I could slip in without being seen. I found Bobby sitting on his usual milk crate in the alley behind the shelter. Bobby's a veteran who's been on these streets longer than I've been a nurse. The city walks past him like he's invisible, but he sees everything. I brought him a warm coffee and a sandwich. They're taking the big dog tomorrow, Bobby, I said, lowering myself onto the cold pavement beside him. Bobby took a slow sip, steam rising between us. He didn't look at me right away, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. Patrol hits the front at 11. Side gate stays unlocked for about 10 minutes, while Gary steps out for a smoke by the dumpster. He's lazy, never checks behind him. You're sure? My hands were shaking. I gripped them together to make it stop. I've been watching him for 3 months, Bobby said. This time he turned to look at me. and his eyes weren't soft. They were hard, like he'd made a decision. "You save that dog, Amy. He's got the heart of a soldier. He shouldn't die like this." I felt my chest tighten. Bobby didn't say things like that lightly. He'd seen enough death to know what it looked like, and he'd seen enough of life to know what was worth saving. "I'll get him out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Bobby nodded once, then looked back down the alley. 11 o'clock. Don't be late, and don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you caught." I stood up, legs stiff from the cold concrete, and walked away. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my throat. This was really happening. I was going to break into a city shelter and steal a dying dog. And somehow, that felt like the rightest thing I'd done in years. At 11:05, the air felt like ice cutting through my jacket. I parked 2 blocks away and killed the engine. My heart was pounding against my ribs, the same way it does in the ER when a patient's monitor flatlines and we're racing against time. I slipped through the side gate exactly like Bobby said. The smell hit me first. Bleach and wet fur and something sour underneath. I moved fast, staying low, until I reached Dante's cage in the back corner. He stood up when he saw me. Slow. His legs were shaking, barely holding him. But he didn't bark. Didn't whine. It was like he understood what was happening. "Hey, big guy," I whispered, my fingers fumbling with the heavy bolt on the cage door. "We're getting out of here." The lock clicked open. In the silence of that building, it sounded like a gunshot. My hands froze. I waited, listening for footsteps. Voices, anything. Nothing came. I didn't wait any longer. I looped a soft lead around his neck and gently pulled him forward. He was heavier than I expected, leaning his whole weight against my leg just to stay standing. We moved together through the shadows, one slow step at a time, past the rows of cages where other dogs watched us in silence. Then I saw him, the guard, Gary, standing by the dumpster with his back to us, the glowing tip of his cigarette bobbing in the dark like a tiny warning light. We kept moving. Dante's nails clicked softly on the concrete. I held my breath. 5 more steps. 3. 1. We made it through the gate. When I finally closed the car door and turned the key, the engine roaring to life, I let myself breathe. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I'd just stolen city property, and I didn't care. Not even a little. I drove straight to an old brownstone on the edge of town. Harold was already waiting at the service entrance, standing under a flickering porch light. Harold used to be one of the best surgeons in the state. Then a bottle of scotch cost him everything: his license, his practice, his life as he knew it. Now he lived in a basement apartment crammed with books and old medical equipment he couldn't let go of. He was grumpy and tired and worn down by life, but his hands were still the steadiest I'd ever seen. "You're out of your mind, Amy," Harold muttered, helping me lift Dante onto a makeshift table he'd cleared off. "You know they'll come looking for him. You could lose everything." "Just look at him, Harold," I said. My voice cracked. I couldn't help it. Harold pressed his stethoscope to Dante's chest. The room went quiet, except for the dog's labored breathing. Harold listened, moved the stethoscope, listened again. His face didn't give anything away. Finally, he looked up at me, and the grumpiness was gone. "Valvular disease. It's bad, real bad. But if we drain the fluid around his heart and get him stabilized, the meds might buy him time. Maybe years if we're lucky." "Then let's do it," I said, reaching for the IV kit I'd slipped out of the hospital supply room earlier that day. Harold shook his head, but he was already pulling on gloves. "You're both crazy," he said, glancing down at Dante. But I've seen worse odds. We worked in silence after that. Harold's hands moved with the kind of precision you don't forget, even after years away from an operating room. And Dante, somehow, stayed calm, like he knew we were fighting for him, like he trusted us to bring him back. The next 3 days blurred together. Wet towels, syringes, medicine schedules scribbled on the back of receipts. I didn't sleep. I stayed in Harold's basement, my car hidden under a tarp in the alley behind the building. Dante fought. Every shallow breath felt like a small victory. I'd sit beside him on the floor, stroking his ears, whispering for him to stay with me. Just stay. By the third morning, the wet rattle in his chest was gone. He lifted his head when I walked in. He ate a full bowl of food. And then, for the first time, he licked my hand. Dry and rough and real. I cried. I didn't even try to stop it. But outside that basement, the world was getting loud. I saw Commissioner Albert on the evening news. Harold had the TV on low in the corner, and there he was, standing in front of the shelter in a clean suit, looking slick and offended. A dangerous animal was abducted from city property, he told the cameras, his voice sharp. This is a serious violation of the law. We will find the person responsible, and they will face the full weight of the courts. He didn't say Dante was scheduled to die. He didn't mention the budget cuts or the fact that dogs were being put down because he'd decided their lives weren't worth the cost. He just wanted his property back so he could prove he was still in charge. Harold turned the volume down and looked at me. They're going to come for you, Amy. I looked at Dante, curled up on his blanket, breathing easy for the first time in who knows how long. Let them, I said, because some things are worth the fight. And Dante, this dog who'd trusted me when he had no reason to, he was worth everything. Bobby found me at Harold's back door on the 5th night. He wasn't sitting on his milk crate this time. He was standing, tense, looking over his shoulder, like someone might be following him. They're checking the clinics, Amy, he said, keeping his voice low. Albert's making noise. He's got the police looking for a suspicious woman in gray scrubs. They're asking questions. My stomach dropped. I looked back through the doorway at Dante. He was lying on a pile of blankets Harold had given him, looking more like a real dog and less like a dying shadow with every passing hour. His tail gave a slow thud-thud against the floor when he saw me watching. I have to move him, I said. Where? Harold came up behind me, wiping his hands on a towel. He's still weak, Amy. He needs rest. He needs stability. I don't know, I said. The words came out sharper than I meant them to. I felt it all pressing down on me. That same crushing weight I get during a bad trauma shift, when everything's going wrong at once and there's no time to think. I'd risked my job, my savings, my freedom. And for what? To get caught now? Then Dante stood up, slow but steady. He walked over to me, his steps stronger than they'd been 3 days ago, and rested his heavy head on my knee. His dark eyes looked up at me, calm and trusting. He was counting on me. I put my hand on his head and felt the warmth of him, the life that was coming back into his body. And I knew right then that I couldn't let fear win. Not now. Not after we'd come this far. I'll figure it out, I said, my voice steadier this time. We didn't save him just to give up now. I decided to stop hiding. If Albert wanted a fight, I'd give him one he couldn't win with a spreadsheet and a press conference. I drove Dante straight to the park across from City Hall. Bobby had spread the word to his friends on the street, and Harold had called a few old contacts he still had in the press. When I stepped out of the car with Dante on a leash, the cameras were already waiting. Commissioner Albert came down the front steps, 2 officers trailing behind him. He looked smug at first, like this was just another problem he could squash with his title. But then he saw Dante, walking steady, head held high, looking like the strong, noble creature he'd always been underneath the sickness. Albert's face went tight. "That dog is city property," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Officer, seize the animal." The officers hesitated. One of them looked at Dante, then at me, then back at Albert, like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing. "He's not a budget item, Albert," I said. My voice came out steady, calm, the same way it does when I'm stopping a bleed in the ER and there's no room for panic. "He was a living soul you condemned to die because of a number on a spreadsheet. I saved him. Now you tell these people, tell them why a healthy dog was on your kill list." The cameras swung toward Albert. A reporter stepped forward, microphone raised. Albert's jaw worked. His face went red. "This is theft of city property. This woman broke the law." "He's breathing because I broke your law," I cut in, "and I'd do it again." Dante sat down beside me, calm and solid. The crowd that had gathered, Bobby's friends, a few people from the neighborhood, reporters, they weren't looking at Albert anymore. They were looking at us. The fallout was massive. Albert tried to have me arrested. He went on the news again, called me a criminal, demanded justice. But the public outcry was a tidal wave he couldn't control. People didn't see a thief when they looked at me. They saw a nurse who gave a damn when no one else would. The city council stepped in a week later. Albert was out. Gone. And they rewrote the shelter's medical policies so that dogs like Dante wouldn't be thrown away like broken furniture. I lost my job at the hospital for a while. Professional conduct violations, they said, using hospital supplies without authorization. I signed the papers without arguing. I didn't mind. I had a new patient to look after, and he needed me more than any shift ever would. Dante lives with me now. He still has a heart condition. He still needs his pills every morning, lined up on the counter next to my coffee. But he doesn't rattle when he breathes anymore. He runs, he plays. He sleeps at the foot of my bed like he's always belonged there. Every evening, we walk past the shelter. Bobby's still there on his milk crate, watching the world go by. He always gives me a little nod. And Dante always wags his tail, like he's saying, "Thank you to the man who helped save his life." I risked everything I had for a dog the world had given up on. My job, my reputation, my freedom. And every single morning when I wake up to the sound of his steady, healthy breathing beside me, I know I'd do it all over again. Because some lives are worth fighting for. Even when the whole world says they're not. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else needs to hear it today.